Gynecologists and OBs. What is the most mind-blowing thing a husband or boyfriend has said? Story from my internship. Checked a woman who was not progressing in labor and thought, that's not a head. Sure enough, the baby was breech. She was a very tiny woman and this was a large baby, so it was pretty clear that she would need a C-section. She was a recent immigrant from a small third-world country, didn't have a partner with her, and spoke absolutely no English. Unfortunately, nobody in the unit spoke her language. I tried my best to mime and explain what was happening and what we were recommending. She nodded yes, but I had a strong sense she didn't understand the explanation. We sent somebody down to housekeeping and the cafeteria, hoping we could find any hospital staff who could translate. Fortunately, we found someone able to translate. It turns out that she understood the baby was breech, but that she thought we would have to literally cut her open and kill her in order to save the baby. Her relief and joy when she finally understood what the plan was something I won't forget. The staff member from housekeeping was wonderful and stayed to support her until she went into the OR. My mum was a general practitioner. She once had a 15-year-old girl come in who had a pregnancy test show positive, but was adamant that she couldn't be pregnant. My mum confirmed the pregnancy, but the girl still refused to believe it was true. She went on to explain to my mum it was impossible for her to get pregnant because her boyfriend had told her that if she laid completely still during the deed, then she wasn't technically doing it and couldn't get pregnant. I was kind of refraining from commenting on any of these stories until I read this crap. This is the kind of loophole you use with the church, not with your doctor, and I can't stop laughing. I worked in a pharmacy and we noticed that a 16-year-old girl was coming back in to pick up her birth control exactly 2 weeks early every month. This was immediately flagged as strange because BC comes in a convenient package that makes it easy to keep track of the daily dose and birth control. It's not really a drug that people hustle to try to get as many pills as they can. Like Xanax, say. After a few months of this, the pharmacist confronted her and learned that every day she took her pill and her boyfriend did too. After Googling what happens when men take birth control, I'm morbidly curious as to how many months this happened for, because the boyfriend in question was probably undergoing some interesting changes as a result. When my wife was delivering our third child, a VBAC, I asked the doctor as a joke, "Can I be the one who chews the umbilical cord in half?" And he looked at me with a distant look and said, "Yeah, I guess." After several complications and several hours, a beautiful girl was in the world and the doctor said, "Okay, Daddy, get down on the floor and chew this cord in two if you're ready." Yeah, I didn't do it. I'm a nurse and helped deliver this girl's first baby. I was still in school at the time. She was like 19, I think. The father, who was obviously much older, was also in the room. After the baby was born, everyone was all excited and emotional, except for the father, who was just like, and shrugged it off. I worked in a diagnostic center. The gynecologist refers a patient for a hoo-ha ultrasound to find out why she's having fertility issues. The techie inserts the probe, woman flinches in pain, the tech asks if it hurts during adult fun times. The woman explains her husband doesn't insert it into the hoo-ha. No, here, while pointing to her belly button. The tech came out red-faced. She had to call the doctor and explain why the patient was having trouble getting pregnant. This happened twice at this clinic. Twice. ER nurse here had a 19-year-old woman come in for abdominal pain. She had 2 kids and was pregnant again. She said she was not happy to be pregnant again, but she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend. I thought the boyfriend may have been abusive or not letting her use birth control or something, so I closed the door and asked her some questions. Turns out she didn't know that banging caused babies. Her life skills class consisted of get boyfriend/married and the babies arrive, with no other details, so she thought once you had a boyfriend, babies were automatic and doing the deed was just a fun thing to do. We had a long talk. I'm not an OB, but work at an L&D hospital. In a note for our patient, there was one from a previous office visit that said, "Chief complaint, husband concerned about wife's weight gain during pregnancy." She was actually under the weight she needed to be at during that time. Seeing mum back in the office for her 2-week follow-up after delivery to remove stitches. She had a tear that needed repair, only to find out that the stitches were gone. Turns out hubby took them out because they were bothering him when they were getting intimate. My mother is an OB GYN. She did a manual hoo-ha exam for a woman, and the husband asked her with an angry tone of voice if there was any other way of doing the exam besides her using her fingers, because he didn't like her putting fingers in his wife. Not an OB, but when I was in med school, I was seeing a pregnant teen who was convinced she couldn't be pregnant. I asked if she was getting intimate with anyone, and she said yes. I asked if she used any kind of contraception, and she said no. However, she said that her boyfriend told her he couldn't get pregnant because he got kicked in the balls. A lot. Not an OB, but I work in an ER, and we had a 22-year-old woman come in a while back. I asked her what she was there for, and she said, "I found a hole." Like an abscess? I found a hole. Okay, is it a wound? Does it hurt? No, it's just a hole. It's a black hole. I 100% didn't understand what she was talking about and knew that I wouldn't get any more info from her at the check-in desk, so I gave her the bracelet and sent her to the triage nurse who had the same conversation with her. She didn't specify anything beyond, "Look, it's just a hole." It was her hoo-ha. I can't… What? 22? How? How did this person get this far? There are so many things that should have happened in her life to enlighten her as to the nature of her anatomy. My goodness. Growing up, my mother was very strict and religious, and girls were forbidden from looking or talking about down there. Could be a similar situation? I was working with a girl who hadn't been married very long, and who hadn't had a period since the one right before her wedding. She had told her older sister, and she had told her she needed to find out if she was pregnant. So she went to the doc, and it was confirmed that she was. She pulls me in the back room so no one else can hear, and she tells me, and I tell her congratulations. She says she has a question for me. She's peeing just fine now, but how will she pee when the baby gets bigger? Won't it block the urine? We worked in a library. I went right out to the stacks and got her a book on anatomy and another on pregnancy. I found the pages on the genitourinary system, and we sat in the break room while I read the one for females with her and explained it like it was a storybook. I was so furious that no one had told her a damned thing. On my OB rotation, husband said, "Holy crap," as the baby crowned, vagaled, passed out, and hit his head on the bedside table on his way down, and had to be admitted to the same hospital his wife was having the baby at. She ended up getting discharged before he did. I definitely gave a story to the nurse who was taking care of my wife and I after our second kid. Having been going through labor all day, only being on liquids, and not giving birth till almost 9 at night, we were relaxing, relative term, with the nurse holding the baby when I turned to ask the nurse a question. She pauses, turns away, turns back to me, and responds with, "Not anytime soon." Disappointed, I tried to ask for more specifics, because I'd casually asked, "When can my wife have snacks?" And that was a pretty nondescript answer for someone who hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Turns out she thought I was asking when my wife and I can have adult fun times together again. After a good laugh, the correct answer was a couple of hours. I can't imagine what was going through her head before the clarification. Work in IM, but a patient's partner not wanting us to reveal an HIV diagnosis to a patient was definitely a low point for me, though where I work it's probably a stretch to even call that surprising. Back in my ER days, a young teenage patient came in with pregnancy-type symptoms. Of course, pregnancy test was positive, and appeared utterly shocked she was pregnant. I asked her if she was intimate with a partner. Yes. Do you use protection? No. Because? No. She still seemed surprised this had happened to her. Mom is an OB-GYN. She called a patient over to tell us she was HIV positive. The patient said, "I knew it," to which my mom asked how and why. Turns out the husband had been HIV positive for years, and they'd decided never to speak about it and have unprotected fun times for 5 years. This is what it costs to shirk responsibility and look the other way. In other words, idiot tax. Last month, a dad asked one of our OBs for an extra stitch during his wife's repair after delivery. Her immediate response was, "Exactly how small do you need it to be, sir?" Fricking legend on our unit now. Spread this so it can become the standard response to this all-too-common statement. I'm not an OB or GYN, however I am a flight medic who has delivered 3 babies. I'll never forget any of them. The second baby I delivered was about 5 weeks early, roadside, in East Jesus nowhere. The family had gone camping in the desert and Mum went into labor. By the time we arrived, there was no turning back and baby's head was visible. Mum was sort of squatting with her forearms on the middle row of seats in a van and her booty was aimed out the door. She was clothed in a loose dress. Just as she was pushing the head out, Dad said, Wait, we might get blood on the floor." Mum rounded on him with the biggest death glare and said, "Frick your mum's van." That became a unit motto. Yeah, frick your mum's van, silly dude. Your wife is delivering your baby. If your mum asks you to reupholster her vehicle hot on the heels of this, she's officially a few Fruit Loops short of a bowl. Sister is a nurse in the mum/baby unit who will also work in labor and delivery. One dad asked for a C-section so her hoo-ha wouldn't be ruined. Another dad asking for her to be stitched up extra tight after the delivery. Another dad that couldn't seem to keep his clothes on during their entire stay. The nurses had to have multiple conversations with him to keep his clothes on. He just kept stripping and walking around, like he'd go out to the coffee station in the hall with only his tidy-whities on, and he'd be buck nude in the hospital room. We had to ask him to wear pants and a shirt when in the hall, and at minimum pants in the hospital room. No, he wasn't even trying to do the deed with her. Not a physician, but I do work in obstetrics. We had a code OB called on the overhead, which means a delivery is happening elsewhere in the hospital, and the team needs to get there stat. A woman's husband was worried about getting a parking ticket, so figured he would park in one of the massive parking garages and then walk up to the door as she's literally giving birth. They obviously didn't make it, and she delivered in the car. They were extremely religious, and to prevent her body from being exposed to what could potentially be a male doctor, they kept her pants on the whole time. Baby, placenta, and all were just chilling in this woman's pants. It was horrifying. Baby and mum were okay in the end. Dad is a 30-plus year OB and gynecologist, now retired. He tells a story of a hyper-religious couple, Muslim, who came in about difficulty getting pregnant. He examined the woman alone and discovered that she was actually an intersex person. Male gonads, undistended, no uterus, normal hoo-ha. The woman was mortified to learn this at 18. She feared her husband would be violent, believing he had been being gay by doing the deed with her. My dad gave her the option to call the police or ask for help. He and the nurses gave her phone numbers for counseling and offered discretion when talking to the spouse. She declined everything and asked that they tell the husband together. The man was super upset and they eventually left the office, both in tears. Dad never saw her again and wonders what happened. Multiple people are asking the question, how did she not recognize something was wrong when she missed her period for multiple years? I'd asked this question myself to my dad as well. The answer, if I recall correctly, was that she did experience mild and intermittent menstruation-like symptoms, cramps, bleeding, etc., but they were very far apart and in hindsight completely unrelated to actual menstruation. She was from a rural community and never sought medical attention due to, who knows, money, fear, and the fact that she was otherwise completely healthy, I presume. I remember him saying that the marriage was arranged, and I'm sure her side of the fam were probably apprehensive about fertility issues. These are tricky situations. My grandpa was a surgeon, private practice, and in the army. Toward the end of his life, we discussed some of the crazy things he did and saw. He told me he operated on a man with 2 tumors in his abdomen. Turned out to be fully developed ovaries. He had fully functioning gonads, no hoo-ha or tubes, etc. Grandpa told him the tumors were successfully removed. The human body is a crazy thing. Back in my OB rotation in med school, we had a pregnant woman who was super morbidly obese with a BMI in the 70s. During her prenatal visit, the resident was asking about her pregnancy history, past difficulty with fertility and conception, problems with the pregnancy so far, etc. Pretty standard stuff as I understand at the time. Husband then chimed in about the conception. Turns out they had no trouble conceiving. He then went into detail about how the conception went and blew my little inexperienced mind. Basically, the wife's mother and sister had to help with the conception by holding the wife's thighs out of the way enough so that he could get in to do the job. I still don't have words. Not anything a husband or boyfriend said, but still an interesting story. I once took care of a patient who had a baby as a virgin. She was a very religious woman who was saving her virginity for marriage. She told me she never met the right man and she was ready to have the baby as she was getting older. She was in her early 40s, so she had the IVF done and had a baby while also being a virgin. Not an OB-GYN, but a med student. In one of my rotations, I had an encounter with a father who wanted us to make his wife only reproduce male children by some drugs or procedure. Our head used to tell us that I can tell if it's a boy or girl by only seeing the expressions of the fathers and relatives in the clinical rounds. You're allowed to guess, my country. I missed 2 minutes ago when I didn't know any of this. Me too, anonymous Reddit user, me too. Although I'm glad to say that none of these medical facts have been a revelation to me, there have been some stories that have been uncomfortable for yours truly to read out loud. My dad is a doctor and his friend was an OB-GYN and was telling my dad a time when a couple came into his office and they were having difficulty having a child. They were trying for over a year to have a child, but the wife never got pregnant. Found out that the man and the woman came up in a very strict upbringing and the man was never putting his eggplant inside of her. He was basically rubbing his eggplant on top of her hoo-ha and would splooge across her belly. Then he would take his finger and smear his semen all over the top of her hoo-ha. My dad's friend had to explain how to do the deed to both of them and tell them what to do and how to do it. It was an awkward conversation. I just kept thinking, did they not ever watch adult flicks or have that talk with their parents? Have they never even seen stuff related to doing the deed ever? It was just a crazy story and I wonder if they ever figured it out and actually eventually had kids or not. My friend told me that her OB-GYN friend told her that apparently a significant number of people try to get pregnant by doing it in the butt. Proper education on these things matters, people. Years ago, I knew a woman that wanted to get pregnant, but that wasn't happening. She told me that one problem was her husband insisting on turning her around at the end and finishing in her butt. Now, she knew that wasn't good for conception, but he didn't, and she couldn't explain it to him in a way that worked. Perhaps I'm just being naive, but things like this make me wonder if he really knew or was playing dumb with his wife so he didn't have to have kids. My doctor told me a story about a baby he delivered. It was the couple's 6th, and they were very observant Orthodox Jews, so when she called at 11 p.m. on Shabbat that labor had started, the husband couldn't drive them to the hospital himself. Although the doctor understood, he tried to help them understand how emergent the situation was because the delivery was going to be so fast. The doctor races to the hospital and waits. He waits 30 minutes. An hour. He's pacing the drop-off. Finally, 90 minutes later, a taxi screeches into the parking lot at 2 a.m. The doctor opens her door to see a baby crowning and the woman yelling and the driver yelling. The husband throws open his door and just sprints off into the parking lot yelling, does a full loop while the baby is born, and runs up as the nurses are wrapping the baby and getting mum and baby into a wheelchair. The doctor said, "What happened? Where did you go?" The dad, I just didn't know what to do." The poor guy was so hopped up on adrenaline that he just took off. Not a mind-blowing thing that was said, but still kind of funny. When I was in medical school, I did my OB rotation on high-risk areas. Medical students were generally scared of these areas, so I was the only student with an awesome attending physician and got to do a lot. We called the attending on this service a random thought generator. If he thought something, he would say or act on it. We had one student that showed up on our service in active labor. She had had a very uneventful pregnancy and couldn't figure out why she was on our service, but hey, we'll take a normal patient. She arrived with perfect makeup, perfect hair, and she had the perfect epidural and was in no pain or distress. The attending looked at me and said that I'd be doing this delivery. Okay, I thought, no problem. Then he looked at the father and said, "No, you'll deliver this one." The father got wide-eyed and the mother started laughing. "He's an air traffic controller. I've never seen him panic before." The nurse took him to the sink, gave him a scrub brush, and had him start washing his hands. We turned back to the mum. "Okay, push. 1, 2, 3, 10. Relax." We looked at the dad and he's still washing that same finger he started with. Okay, that's good enough. A delivery is by no means sterile. Put this and this and this on. Our attending didn't put women in stirrups, but would instead deliver straight onto the bed. He sat the dad on the bed with him on one side and me on the other, and the dad delivered his own healthy child. My mum taught labor and delivery. If the baby won't fit, it's too late for a C-section, so you break up the baby's shoulder so it can fit through. One of her students asked why they don't break the mum's hip instead. Not a doctor, but pregnant. I told my boyfriend we should make and freeze 1 to 2 months of meals before the birth, because we'd be too tired to cook. He looked at me knowingly and said, "Ah yes, like pureed fruits and vegetables, so we don't have to mash them ourselves." He literally thought you feed the baby food from day one. We're in our 30s, college-educated, he has a huge, close extended family with lots of babies, and he knows I'm going to breastfeed. I guess he thought you do them both from day one? My ex-boyfriend is an OB-GYN. He got annoyed with me when I was having cramps and said because he was an OB-GYN, he knew exactly what pain felt like and told me to get over it. Should have seen that as the first of many red flags. Obligatory, not an OB-GYN, but an operating room nurse. One gynecologist told us once about their gynecologist in training. We all knew him. He was a young, friendly, and good guy to work with. He was already married, father of 2 kids at the age of 25. This guy only had one negative aspect, and it was affecting his work dearly. He was extremely religious. This doesn't have to be negative, but his decision-making was based on his religion, and he often refused to offer contraceptives to his female patients, and he was reserved talking and explaining contraception methods to couples. It was against his religion. Eventually word got around with his superiors and they had to sit him down, explaining with him it's against the law to withhold any form of help and information. I was a receptionist and this woman came in crying. Her husband was behind her and she said, "Help, I'm bleeding." Long story short, we found out she was actively miscarrying in the lobby. She went to the back room for emergent care while a surgical room was prepped and she was, of course, crying and moaning and seemed to be in immense pain. The husband was stoic the whole time, nonplussed, not bothered in the least. He frowned at her moaning and said, "Will you knock it off? You're embarrassing me." He even had the nerve to ask us to watch his daughter in our break room while he went for a smoke. Had to have an emergency C-section and my husband was in there watching the whole thing over the sheet. After the baby was born, the doctor removed the placenta and my husband asked, "What is that?" Without missing a beat, the doctor turns to the second doctor assisting, holds it up and says, "I don't know. What is this?" All I could see at this point was my husband's face, and it was so worth it. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.